Hello and happy August. It's the August Answer the Call to Conscious Leadership event. Thank you for being here. Thank you to my panelists, who I'll introduce in a moment. And thank you to our members of the C3 community. The C3 stands for Corporate Consciousness Co-op. What we're all here in the community to do is to co-create a more conscious corporate landscape. So if that sounds like you and you're not already in this community, please get in this community. We are pro-promotion. Pretty much what we believe is that if you're doing something out there that's doing something to further the consciousness of the corporate landscape, we don't want it to remain a secret. We don't want to be in competition with you. We want to co-create with you. We want to move this tidal wave of change forward in the right direction. So please join us. Please tell us what you have been doing that has been working, and then come on to an event just like this and share that with us. This month, the topic that won the poll in the C3 community is connecting versus networking. And that topic was introduced by Christopher King. Christopher King from King Connections is a conscious leader, connector, and strategic thinking partner. I'll introduce the other panels before I throw it to him. We also have here Shawn Watkins, who you might remember has been a panelist before for us. He's also hosted his own events, which if you want to add to the calendar any of your own events to cover important topics. I know Sharon and Carl, along with Christopher Waters, hopefully later this month, are going to hop on and cover DEI, which is like come in second so many times, but it really should be first all the time, right? So we have Carl. Carl is a co-founder and COO of Heliplex. I think I'm saying that right.
Wait, say it again. I'm sorry.
I might be saying it wrong.
That's Sharon.
That's you. That's Sharon. I'm so sorry. I didn't put the names of this when I was copying and pasting. Actually, Carl is vulnerability and DEI consultant. He's transforming the diversity, equity, and inclusion landscape through embracing vulnerability in leadership. He's also known as you can see under his name, Mr. Vulnerability. Sharon, did I say that right? Heliplex?
Heliplex, you did.
Okay, all right. She's the co-founder and COO of Heliplex. She's a human capital development leader, trusted advisor, executive consultant, speaker, moderator, author, change agent in organizational development, DEI, racial advocacy, social and community impact. Thank all three of you for being here today. I'm so glad we're here to talk about connecting versus networking. So I'm going to throw it to Christopher King. Tell us why this was a topic that you felt that should be covered in this community. In addition to that, please share your distinctions around connecting versus networking.
Well, thank you. First, I want to say thank you for allowing me to be on this panel. I'm honored to be here, and I appreciate everyone listening in. Now, for me, I wanted to choose this particular topic because I believe a lot of people use those as synonyms to one another, networking, connecting, and in my mind, they're not. They're totally separate activities, totally separate actions that you do. I look at networking, and again, I'm not saying this from a judgment context. I'm just saying this from what I look at the importance of connecting. I look at networking as just strictly meeting someone, you exchange information, and people have speed networking sessions where they do that. You go through your 30-second elevator speech, you listen to the other person, and then you all move on to the next person. And the goal is to get as many business cards as you can possibly get. Network with as many people as you possibly get. And that's the objective behind networking typically. Well, I look at connecting being much more deeper, much more personal, much more intimate. Connecting is when you actually establish a relationship with someone and you're present there, first of all. I think it's four key criteria to connecting. Number one is being present. Number two is engaging. You actually want to engage with the person. Number three is that you want to be, as Carl has, you want to be vulnerable. You want to submit and be submissive so that you can actually be open to learning what the other person has to say. And then number four, you want to make sure that you actually look for a way to create value for that connection that you're making. And so that's when I say, I have a methodology and a process I call connecting with intent. And connecting with intent is to do something greater than you were able to do by yourself, co-creating. And so that's what makes the connection process that's much more enriching, much more fulfilling, and that much more, I would say, beneficial, creating that win-win for both parties.
Yeah, I feel that. That's what this community is all about, after all. And then Sharon and Carl, you both were like, I want in on this topic. I really want to be there to connect to talk about this connecting versus networking. So Sharon, share with us what compelled you to want to join us and talk about this.
Yeah, so first of all, I get a lot of questions and feedback around connecting, probably from, certain methods, how I show up, in certain spaces and the intentionality that I have around what those spaces can look like, right? So, extrovert by trade, introvert in nature, right? So,
Mhm.
I think that it's important for people to first of all understand, who they are, coming into spaces when they are looking to connect with intent, as Mr. King is saying, but also trying to think through how you build a relationship, because that's really all it is, right? I think that all relationships, whether work, of any personal sort, of any advocacy, of any volunteerism or whatever, is about connecting, to the point of what that service, what that value, that added value is going to be, and also selfishly what you gain from that connection, right? And so if people are not setting the boundaries around, why we are spending time, together, that's where things kind of fall apart. And I think that that's where people struggle, in this whole networking versus connection space. And so I'm all about relationship, right?
Yeah.
And so we have to be in relation with one another in order to get to the greater good, good trouble and good gain. So that's why I wanted to hop in and see what, others were sharing in this space, and always just to add value if I can.
Sharon, we all know what it looks like to get a LinkedIn invitation that we have no context for why it's being sent
Oh,
to us, right?
right. You're
I
like,
mean,
okay. What? Or they'll be like, hey, I see your this, or this. Like, I
right.
think we would be a great match for a connection. And I'm like, um, can you tell me more? But also a little bit of it is get to the point, right?
Yeah.
To the elevator speech, to whatever the time frame, whatever tool, the mechanism of communication you're using to connect with people, time is of the essence.
Mhm.
So what you want from people, which is not a big thing in the world today, it's shades and mirrors, is what do you need, right? And if I'm available to provide that service or collaborate with you, then certainly I have a choice of doing so. Hence, choice, right? And
Yeah.
if I don't, I'm also allowing you the freedom to move forward quicker,
Mhm.
by you, sending these other things or these other questions. Like, and this is just a really quick story, guys. Like, I got the weirdest inbox from a young lady who does, executive coaching and is trying to tap in, with the women's movement and Me Too movement, that's been, kind of populating right now. But it was like a hi, how are you? So I thought it was spam. Do you know what I
Mhm.
mean? Like, I didn't know what you needed. And then the next one, so I was like, "Hello, how are you?" Like, I looked at the profile, "Hello, how are you?" Just to be responsive, and it was really because I had the time to do it at that moment. And she's a
Mhm.
younger millennial, so like I was kind of thinking that this is what was about to happen. But then the next question was, "Just checking in on you and your week." Okay, weird. Like, people, I don't know you and you don't know me. So what is it like? I
Yeah.
didn't know what was happening. So the offering of relationship and just really getting in and setting some boundaries around why you're connecting with individuals, what your need might be, and what another might be open to, I think is critical to
Getting
connection. So
getting
yeah,
to the heart of the matter, keyword heart, right?
keyword,
Yeah.
keyword.
All right, Carl, you also were like, I want in on this conversation. Tell us why this conversation was one that compelled you.
Well, it compelled me because there's such a misunderstanding in the essence of those terms, and we are as a society, and I just mean that as the English language, we understand things, and we formulate two words, we put them together, and we make another word. Most of the times when we form those two words together, they're oxymorons. They don't match, but we form it together to make something that's supposed to be compatible. This is where we come from in networking and versus each other and versus understanding the connecting piece of that. I love what Sharon says, but I also put it in the dynamics because everyone isn't everyone isn't astute at those terms and how they should be used. We've had this old adage of the networking was, as Mr. King said, passing out cards, getting as many what I can say speed dating for connections, right? I'm going to a networking event. We've had those before in the past, and I'm sure you guys have worked and been in corporate businesses as well where you've attended these, right? And it's the quickest of how we can get something connected through that. It's really the interest way. I always call it the receptionist because I'm here to show you something that I have, and maybe we can continue our conversations. I think the key part about the connecting, I put it in there earlier, the networking is about knowing more people. That's why we have followers. That's why we seek to have followers. That's why we seek to grow our expansion, grow our network. All of those terms are essence and key in growing, but they're not necessarily cultivating relationships, and they're not necessarily cultivating the connecting. That's why I talk about a lot when I'm talking to CEOs and C-suites and leaders. The connections and the disposition of connections that you have with those you lead is because you don't know those you're leading. You've been given that title, you put in this position, maybe because you've done the job well, maybe because you was excellent at talking to people, conversing what you want people to do. But do you actually know people? There's a point in place where you have to understand who you're leading, who could be pushed, who can't be pushed. That comes from connecting. And a lot of times we cross the line with the connecting, say, I need to know so much about you. No, it's not the point. It's being self-observant and self-aware of the individual that you're interacting with. What moves them? What shakes them? And I get a lot of those, and I talk about them a lot on the shows that I have. In the essence of those leaving connections without messages. I connect with everyone. And some people give me some throwback on that and say, man, my God, you connect with everyone? Yes, because there's a weeding out aspect that I put into play. It's a program that I run. So of course, I never want to disallow myself to not be available to people. But can I actually? No, time won't allow me. So a lot of times in those connections, those conversations, I find out who gets my time, who doesn't. Because you never know. My dad used to tell me as I was growing up, it only takes one person to run into to change your life. Now that can be good or for bad. So if you close the door to that in the essence of thinking about who you actually going to meet, yeah, you can miss out on a lot. But yeah, I love this topic because I love what it says. I love the meaning behind it. And I love the understanding. There's intentional ways that we do connect, that we do network. Yes, I saw your profile. Sharon, you had some things on there that I'm not maybe doing now, but I had some ideas about. I want to get information about. So I may put that in there. Millennials, I'm learning now, they do a lot of things text talk. They don't complete sentences. They use phrases. They use catchwords. So I'm learning with two adult kids that's trying to teach me how to text. I'm learning what things mean without me understanding as a whole head. Use a complete sentence so I can understand what you're asking. So some of those things come into play when we're making, I won't say the assessment, the assumptions, but when we're making those separations of, okay, you want to connect with me? Yeah, how are you? Would mean that you want to know something personal, right? Well, if I want to share, what does your business do? Then I'm coming at those angles, and they're very great angles. I just love the conversation of them.
Yeah, me too. I love these conversations. This reminds me of when I'm trying to teach, not teach, I don't want to make it sound like they don't know how to network, but a lot of my clients know how to network. But when it comes to generating leads for their next employment situation, I hear them saying, I got these invitations. I don't know what to do with them. I don't want to necessarily spend my time talking to people who have nothing to do with my industry. And I'm like, you really don't know where that lead's going to come from. So don't use they're not in my industry as a screening mechanism. So Carl, if you could just give us a little window into what is it that when you do get a chance to have an exchange with these folks who want to connect with you, what is it that you use as a criteria to connect? I know Christopher has his own. We'll get to them next.
Yeah, I use life experiences, right? I use it because of the generation in which I've come from. But what I've been taught through these conversations and interactions, how I can reformulate that to reach those who are not of my generation. And I think this is what's being lost, especially in corporations, is we have those that have been there 30 or 40 years, and they're kind of like the cornerstone. And then you have the new graduates coming in that's just zealous and want to be involved. I think I use everything that I do in conversations as an ambassadorship. How can I be your spokesperson? Give me the tools to use to represent you. And I guess that's probably law talk too. That's my learning and forte there as well. But I get to the heart of the conversation. A lot of people don't know how to articulate what they feel, and they definitely don't know how to explain it to someone else. So creating that safe space, and not necessarily psychological, but creating that safe space in which you delve with questions that will allow them the freedom to tell you the things that they're seeking, because everybody's not prepared for the interview. Everybody's not prepared to articulate. Yeah, you got. I seen your profile. You got these many followers. I think you would be a good mentor for me. That's a stumbling block for some people to articulate. But
Yeah.
what you do in the essence of the conversation, you make that a pliable space where they feel okay with telling you just about anything. And that's how I got the name Mr. Vulnerability.
Awesome. I want to hit on that a little bit more as after we talk to Mr. King about his criteria. I know when we first talked, you had some questions for me, Christopher, around. Well, I'll just let you jump in. You have criteria, and you. I first actually connected with you through an invitation to jump on your podcast, which has to be like a really great. I don't know if Christopher's frozen or not.
No, I'm here.
Okay.
He's just so smooth like that. He ain't moved.
So still. Which has to be a really great, opener to connect with people, because automatically you're like, we have a reason to talk, which is great, But go ahead and tell us more about your criteria for evaluating who you want to take the connection further with.
Well, yeah, thank you for the question. For me, I've gone through, like many of us, bad connections with people that I regret having. And so I'm a system engineer by trade. And so for me, I'm always process oriented. I'm always thinking, how do I become more efficient at a particular task? So I want to become more efficient at building relationships, at building connections. And so I began to look at what I was doing wrong and what I needed to do right. And so what I realized is that I really wanted to have certain characteristics, the key characteristics I defined, that I wanted to make sure an individual had that makes me attractive to wanting to be attracted to them to with their connection. So I came up with 8 core virtues. But then I realized I had to make sure that I myself exhibit those same virtues, right? I want to attract who, you don't attract what you want, you attract who you are. That's what I'm doing. So within that context, my 8 core virtues were: number 1, being principle centered; number 2, being value driven; number 3, being action oriented; number 4, being results focused; number 5, being growth minded; number 6, being servant leader; number 7, being accountability acceptor; and then number 8, being having a grateful spirit. So for me, that's what I look for. Not that someone has to have all 8, but someone has to have at least 3 of those 4 things. So they have to definitely be someone with a growth mindset, right? Because if you don't have a growth mindset, you have a fixed mindset, we can't build. If you're not looking to learn anything, there's nothing we can do together. We can't co-create.
Yeah.
Number 2, if you don't have a grateful spirit, that's also something to turn off. Someone that's always upset about what they don't have or feel what they're lacking. They can't be grateful for the little things in life, such as the ability to see, hear, walk, talk, stand, breathe, and have sound mind at the very core level. So to me, no matter what project you're working on, what proposal you're writing, no matter how large it may be, if you can't hear, you can't see, your mind is not there, none of that matters. And then the third is being principle centered. Principles to me are a key and at the foundation of who I am as an individual. And I look for individuals who have those principles, because being principle centered, and the book that I love, which is a book that I use as my Bible, I constantly read from a daily basis. Not to say it's the equivalent of a Bible, but I'm saying using it as a Bible, you would, not just a book you read once and put away. It's a book you study from a how do I live from this book on a daily basis. And that's a 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen R. Covey. Being principle centered means that no matter what the circumstances are, my principles guide my behavior, not the circumstances. So if I'm poor, in other words, if I'm broke because I had to pivot, I'm not going to go steal and then justify because I have lack of money that justifies my stealing. No, my principle says I don't steal regardless. I'm a servant. I have to serve. So to me, that's the criteria I look for. And then lastly, I would say what's really important to me now in this time of my life, being in my 50s, and going through some of the challenges I've gone through in my life of doing business, and I've had my ups and downs like everyone has had, is looking for alignment. And that's what I look for from a connection. Are you and I in alignment on certain things? So as I said before, co-creating. When you are a person that's building relationships, you're co-creating whether you're a client, vendor, or partner. So if you're a client of mine, we're co-creating to create a product or service for you. And I understand I'm invested in that success. I offer 30-day money back guarantee because if you're not happy, I don't want you paying me. I don't want to be a bill. I don't want to be someone in your life that just, when you hear my name, it just brings negative energy to you, right? That's where I'm at. So if that's the case, here's your money back. I bless and release you. So that for me is why connection is so important. And then having these characteristics are key to just establishing that dialogue in those relationships.
Got it. Great. Sharon, I mean, it sounds like your criteria are get to the point, right? If there's something that I feel like I can contribute to, I'm sure you have other criteria, which I'd love to give you the chance to answer to that as well. I also know that you have a background with local government, and I also wanted to know from your perception, from your perspective, what is it that stops leaders from making that connection?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a number of things, and thank you for that. I think people first being centered around what they desire and what people perceive as barriers is always the halt, right? As Black and Brown people, we are in spaces where we often are forced into the command, and the command kind of changes to a demand of whatever asset that we are bringing into the room in resolution of sometimes trauma, sometimes, we didn't break it, but you want us to fix it, whatever that looks like from a DEI space. Or even a building space. So now being in a startup space, like, for me, it's even more, present around what the world lacks in support of people who look like me, right? Where I might, step into a room and say I have A, B, C, D as a thing. And I'm going to be asked to provide 25 things, data metrics that take 3 to 5 years when we're just beginning to someone who is an other, right? And a possible ally who's going to get it and also be allowed to fail, right? In that very same
Yes.
thing. Um, at the same time, so the barriers, right, are biased, right? 11 million
Yes.
things happening at one time, and any one person is only processing 40 a minute. The reality is your barrier is you, the barrier is others, the barrier is the resolution and disagreement around how to get there. So the get to the point part for me is people being able to understand your value set, understand that value set up under a larger value system, and really trying to understand what we're trying to get to. Like, conscious leadership, for me is just that, being conscious of your surroundings, to Mr. King, to Mr. Watkins, point like who's in the room, why are you there? I can show up, right? Well, in a room. That's not an issue for me. But I don't always, and people will wonder why, like, oh, like something's off. No, it just, I don't feel like any words that I might offer into resolution is going to change the narrative of this conversation. So I just gracefully bow out, right? So I think time is of the essence when it's appropriate, right?
Yeah.
So there's barriers of who people are, what people believe about themselves, people coming in trying to um, people coming in with bias and perceptions of who others are when they're trying to get to the word. So barriers lack invitation to the conversation. Barriers are the table. I could be, Shirley Chisholm and say, I make my seat. I might go biblical and say I want to flip it over and start it again. Maybe we just change the dishes. I don't know. Whatever that needs to look like, what often happens or what's missing is that people do not ask.
Yeah.
People do not ask for permission to show up differently than the way in which they showed up the day before. And it just causes friction to resolution, right? So sometimes the barrier is I want a solution today versus I just want a solution,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So the careful ploy on words, and also being resolute in your own identity, but giving room for others' identities as well to show up in whatever way, right? So that diversity, that inclusion, your way isn't the right way. Like sometimes you can walk into the room and that it's going to be a certain set of rules have been established um, as a barrier.
Mm-hmm.
So you get to decide even then,
Mm-hmm.
how you show up in the room. But those are the big barriers, especially with government, right?
Yeah.
We can only make movement in certain times, certain budgets, certain time frames. Is it governor level, mayor level,
Mm-hmm.
high level Washington, like who's in the room and what are we trying to solve for? All of these things people are kind of attempting to digest the environment around them instead of just showing up and being. And allowing things to kind of unfold in an organic, way, which is really what connection is. Again, I go back to it is building, relationship. And sometimes that means that it's just not about you, and where do you provide grace in the moment for others to be even in their flaws, right? If I go into a DEI space, we'll talk about this in the next one, but there's trauma everywhere, and
Mm-hmm.
unless you level set the room, right, then people are just operating from whatever their belief system is. And everyone doesn't have your belief system. Sorry. Whether you
Yeah.
look like me or not, they just don't. Right. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm not the spokesperson for African American people or whatever adjective you decide to provide attached to your name, to your being. Um, but you have to recognize that whatever your lived, I think I heard someone say, what your lived experience could be inappropriate to the conversation that you're currently in, because someone else also has their own set of lived experience and they too get to show up
Mm-hmm.
and belong in that space.
Wow. You've said so much right there. I don't know if I could really encapsulate it very clearly, but I think that that's that self awareness piece that shows up every time we have these conversations. That, if you don't know that you have bias, it's going to operate without, that, and that's an unconscious way to lead, obviously. So that's like the major pinnacle of consciousness is just being aware that other people have lived experiences, being aware that other people have biases, that other people have trauma. I want to talk a little bit about leveling the room. But first, I also want to throw it back to Carl because it sounds like that vulnerability piece
Yeah.
um, is coming into play again when it comes to making that connection, and just being able to admit, right, that you're coming to the table with trauma, you're coming to the table with your bias. What does that look like in terms of making a connection? When does vulnerability enter into it? What does it look like?
Oh man, Sharon, I almost created a cash app for you. Yes, wait on that. You took me to my church roles. I'm a preacher as well, so all things to me come through that. And I thought Mr. King was about to go with that Bible thing. I was like, all right, Mr. King, you get me excited up off my seat over here. Um, but I definitely think you led and you covered all that and you encapsulated all of that with the one true word that we never honor everybody with, and that's grace. There's
Mm-hmm.
one thing in particular that every individual does not honor every other individual with grace. And if we individually honor each other in the grace and space that we're in, a lot of these things you're going to have issues in, right? But like my mother used to say, when she's pastor my church, and grandma too said, there is no perfect church, right? So when you think about the aspect of that, how does vulnerability play in that? I'll share with you guys just quickly my story. I was molested as a youth by a family member. That turned into me having an alcohol addiction to numb the pain. That turned into me being a depressed teenager, early man. That turned into me joining the military and attempting not once, but twice to commit suicide. Right?
Mm.
I share with that. Yes, that's a lived experience. Everybody can handle that, and it's gravy to it. So I understand that. But there are points and places in that journey where I can identify with everybody that I talk to in the room because the pain is something that resonates with all of us. Now, what could be the indicator of it? What could be the causation of it? It doesn't matter. You felt it, you've lived it, you've experienced it. And I thought at one point when I started on this vulnerability journey, how can I, working in corporate America for 30 years, talking to those who don't look like me that are in C-suites and in levels of ownership where I'm bringing the same smarts to the table, but not getting respected in the category of which I bring it. How can I be in the room where it happens? And I said vulnerability was the key to it. And so when I started writing my DEI work, I started saying diversity plus vulnerability equals inclusion. If I can get the diverse people to understand they need to be a little bit vulnerable to be included, I can also get the ones that's already included enough to know they need to be a little bit vulnerable so they can add the diverse. And there's an extension in that equation that lets us know that I have to be, and I put it in the quote earlier, it was a quote about being invited to the dance. Diversity is being invited to the dance. Inclusion is being asked to dance. I added my piece to that. And vulnerability is knowing your dancing partner. Because when you get to the vulnerability piece of that, which is encompasses grace, you'll have an understanding where, yes, I'm in the room with Sharon, but Sharon allows this to be. My essence is showing up consistently. Will it be diaper one day? Will it be damper one day? Will it be excitable one day? Absolutely. But I'm there. Will I add contents to a relationship or a conversation that will excel or move that forward? I will. But there will be days that I won't be able to have anything to offer to that. And my grace has allowed me to step back and say, this day is not mine. So I've learned to be in relationships for other people. And when I say that, people say, man, that don't make no sense. You should always be looking for what you can get out of a relationship. What I get out of a relationship is the connection that I have with the person that I'm trying to be connected with. And that doesn't always mean me. And this is for somebody that's been married 30 years. You automatically know off the bat, it ain't about you. As in the marriage is the husband, right? The women rule the household. And those are things that I say in the simplicity of that is that we have to have an understanding in the dynamic that we're in. Reading the room is crucial. I give talks all the time. And I just did one in July in Charlotte. And I had 3 people in the room look like me. Two of them had AVP on their name, and they was surprised about even being there with the C-suite. So this lets you know the dynamic of their thinking. So in essence, to get to that room and the coverage of that room, I had to read the room. I couldn't come in there with my little story of Chicago, told I wasn't going to be past 25, drugs, alcohols, gangs, and that. They couldn't hold that. They couldn't stomach that. But what I did go to a pain that they were all suffering through, not being able to communicate with each other effectively and not understanding what it takes for me to understand that my name is only on the door because of you all that's working down below. And when C-suiters and understanding and leaders and CEOs get to understand this piece of the puzzle, you won't be engaging in a great resolution or great resignation. You'll be engaging in people that brings value no matter what they look like, no matter what they encompass. And I think you led that graciously with grace. If I don't have grace, then who am I? There but go the grace of God, go I. If he didn't do what he did, how could I do what I did? So I can't step on your head because we ain't thinking the same. I can't step on your head that you showing up today and you angry. You might have had an angry ride into work. Don't want to discuss it. Don't want to be bothered. See, we place so many things on the judgmental sense based upon what has happened to people in everyday living. I can't call you a bad person because you got a bad home situation. It's the cart you was dealt and you're trying to live through it. So my grace tells me, how can I be a support to it? How can I be a solution for you? And how can I be a connection or a networking individual that has hope and solace in what you're going through? So those are some of the things that I touch on in my vulnerability piece there.
It sounds like vulnerability is your method of meeting people where they're at. And I think that's really powerful. I love that.
It's always there. You can't meet them anywhere else. If you meet somebody where they're at, you might as well see them on social media. So we have a lot of people on social media are not where they're at, but they're pretending to be. Yeah. And those are the kind of things that bring about the ugliness of what we're talking about today. Mm-hmm. Yes, I can't tell you everything. It's not expedient. The Bible even tells you that. It's not expedient to say all things, but there are things that we have the power to hold on to, and there are things that we have the power and we're needed to share so you can transform someone else's life. Holding on to a secret all the time is dead end.
That's really, I want to just repeat that, like holding on to a secret is like preventing yourself from saving someone's life.
Yeah,
That's really powerful. And I'm assuming if we can connect on pain, then we can also connect on joy. King, what do you have to say about that?
Well, I believe that first of all, I just want to acknowledge Carl for being Mr. Vulnerable in this conversation, because I think that's what he shared was powerful and definitely an expression of his vulnerability. But I think that as we begin to look at connecting on joy and pain, to me, that's where, again, I was saying being present comes in, because I believe the only way you really can connect is to really be present and being, and what I mean by being there and not thinking about what you're going to do after the event or what you did before the event, but really listening with the other person, as Stephen R. Covey talks about, seeking first to understand, then be understood. That's a skill that has to be learned.
Yes.
Because most people's normal reaction is, at most, I'll be considered enough to be quiet. But I'm already in my mind formulating my next thought, because what you're saying is not as important as what I want to get out. So I think once you become present, and then you can hear what someone's pain is, and then they can be vulnerable and you can experience that vulnerability with them. I think that's important as well, and experience it without judgment. I think that's key, because then you can begin to look at, well, how can I serve, which is next. And as Carl talks about, I'm at the stage in my life where serving, I'm a service leader. And that's really my purpose in life, is to serve. How I serve has changed throughout the decades. My computer background in my 30s and in my 40s in real estate. So now it's really a combination of both of those, but service has always been at the core. And because I want to create joy in what I'm doing with individuals. I want a person to experience, I always say, the Oprah effect. And what I mean by the Oprah effect is, imagine it could be at 5 o'clock in the morning. You could be dead tired from a long night at work. But if you got a call on your phone and it showed up in a call ID that's Oprah Winfrey, you knew it wasn't a scam call, then you would be happy to accept their phone call. And you will maybe tell Oprah, I'll call you back when I wake up. But the joy in that call would bring an immense amount of pleasure to you. I want to be able to create that kind of pleasure for someone based on my characteristics, based on my track record, and based on who I am as an individual. So I think creating joy is key and paramount as an objective behind connecting people.
I'd have to agree. I think that we can relate on the pain and then move it forward by creating something that creates joy, which is what these events do for me, especially with such amazing panelists. So Sharon, grace has come up. It's something it's a word that you brought into the conversation, and Carl definitely had great expansion upon that theme. And I can see energetically how creating that space of grace is the key to making sure that, in spite of whatever limits exist in an environment, that grace can be created. Are there other steps that are beyond the just energetic? Like, how do you take a room where there are people from different lived experiences, different biases, different traumas, and create grace around it so that people can make an authentic connection?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. It's always the conundrum, at the same time. I think that, certainly over the years, I've gotten better at my approach with it. But I think I also have learned some tactics, in testing the temperature, as I like to call it. So my mantra is growth and grace, right? It's something that I'm known for. Because I believe all people are entitled, to grow without me putting a barrier, to what that growth could look like, right? So when you're talking about organizations, historically, growth has been undergirded to a set of criteria that make you valuable to the next level within an organization if your choice is to grow. But what it doesn't often address is the cyclical, aspect of what's happening in work environments. And growth isn't always up, into management, which is what most people think about. When you talk about growth within an organization, the leveling up versus how leveling could look like widespread, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the additions of new policy and practice and the doing away of, right? So when I step into rooms, again, I'm a big believer of asking questions, and usually that first question is, what do we hope to accomplish here today, right? It doesn't, it's open-ended. It allows for a number of different perspectives, even though it's underneath the umbrella of a larger topic, whatever that is, which is why I came into this space. Like, oh, I even want to know what is this conscious leadership approach to connecting, versus networking, right? I think both are tactical, both provide outcomes when you go into them knowing, right? Like, I like to network, I like to get in and get out. Coming out of leadership, I have invested, keyword invested, into relationship that I can tap into right later on, as I am connecting with leaders to say, hey, I'm looking for service to me now, in a space where I might have lended service, to others. And I think that there's also a fine line between service and being a servant
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
leader, right? Both have boundaries, right?
Yes.
People don't always talk about. I have boundaries to my service, right?
Mm-hmm.
That helps me stay whole, that helps me stay full, and whatever parameters I need to set for myself for mental, emotional, physical, spiritual well being.
Yes.
As a servant, one is a product to me of the other, but they're not mutually exclusive, right? I can be of service to you, but have no desire to be a servant in the type of organization that you are running, period.
Mm-hmm.
That's not
Mm-hmm.
even a comma, right?
Very true.
So
Yeah.
people get that a little bit twisted up. So when I level set a room coming in, I want to know what we're trying to accomplish. And I also ask then in return, what is your hope, right? That I can have. When I'm facilitating, it's a simple question. I am here to help you get what you need. What do you want? Right? Let's talk
Yeah.
about what you want versus what you might need, so that we can start to have some real conversation about what that could actually look like. And so it's again, I mean, the grace of God is coming up, but that's also invitation. That's not
Mm-hmm.
forced. And so I think I like to do the same thing when you come in level setting a room. I like to honor what I know is likely present: trauma. People don't know how to make correct decisions. You have different levels of leadership, accountability, and responsibility in a room. So I like to call it out. I like to clear the path of all of the stuff that's holding people up.
Mm-hmm.
I often ask people, like, especially in larger settings, like when you're facilitating with a lot of people, I invite them to shake off their morning. I think it was King who talked about, or maybe it was Carl, like, you know, whatever your day was before you got here. A lot of organizations, there used to be this old saying, like, when you come to work, leave your personal life at home. Impossible. You're still the
Yeah.
same person, when you walk through the door than you were before you got here. So I don't ask people to not be themselves. I ask them to show up authentically present. Hold your back up in the room, man or woman, whatever that is for you. And then now that we've addressed that, all things can be possible during this time. There could be pain in the room, there could be joy in the room. There's also opportunity
Mm.
in the room for different. And that's how I personally choose to level set the space, is to take away, these titles of things that we put on pain. My pain, even if I was in the same car accident as you, is different. My memory of that is going to be different than your own, even though we shared a similar experience. So I just tend to invite people to be themselves, to be honest, and candid in the space, so that real work, like real change, can be of opportunity in the space. I invite you to be crude where appropriate, and I ask for permission in the room for others to allow that to happen. It might sound like, could land on you like a certain way. So if today is not the best day for you to be in this room, no shade, no shame, no guilt,
Mm.
exit.
Mm.
Because the work still has to be done, right? And we want it
Yeah.
to be effective. So I try to tend to level set rooms around the honoring of people and who they are, so that they get to show up their most authentic self. Also understanding that people get to begin again every single day. Like
Awesome.
yesterday, I was on the floor, flailing around, crying, screaming, blah, 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 blah. And today I came in with a smile, and you're like, what happened? Oh, I just stood up. I just got up.
Oh man, you know what, that everything you just said was so practically applicable. You know, like somebody can really take
Really
what you just said and just like apply it to every single meeting, every single event they speak at. That was just you
keep it
know,
simple.
I
KISS
love it.
method. Keep it
Yeah.
simple, stupid.
Yeah. Yeah. I had a question I was going to ask, but does anybody have a burning comment they want to make? We have we have a little time. I don't know if we want to get to closing statements or if there's something that's hanging out in the air there.
I just
Someone-
wanted,
Go ahead,
I
King.
just want to chime in on what Sharon was saying. I think in this world now where everyone or conscious businesses or businesses who claim to be conscious from a branding standpoint are saying that they're open to diversity and inclusion. And I think what Sharon just laid out is critical because from my perspective, I've seen folks who now market themselves on LinkedIn as diversity inclusion officers or experts. And I personally think I kind of want to get Sharon and Carl's perspective on this, that it has to be someone who can speak to it from their particular background. Like, I don't think, like, and again, I'm not saying this to be biased against anybody else, but I can't see, for example, I've seen an Asian woman now getting that, and it's like, well, she can speak about it from an Asian perspective, but how can you speak about divergent inclusion from a Black perspective? So I just kind of want to get you all thoughts on, in that space, as connections, how people are utilizing that as a way now to generate business and market themselves as consultants.
Yeah, it's a big deal, right? So listen, we were DEI before DEI was an acronym, right? I mean, this is probably likely to be on repeat when we come again, but it's pretty simple for me. Before I deal with diversity and inclusion, I focus on equity. If equity is not in the room, diversity and inclusion are void, right?
Mm-hmm.
So my question goes back to the original: what are we here to accomplish? With that being said, DEI in itself was not just about Black people, even though we held a space, right? What DEI is today has been centered around particular parts of our history, and specificity around local trauma that has been happening over this past 5 years. Like I did an article on this in Philadelphia Citizen. Is like, what have we learned? The reality is that it is about all diversities, including white. The problem, or I would like to say the concern of this is that we exclude everyone before we get to including anybody. So allyship and specificity is around what I'm still trying to hold on to, because I don't believe I played a part of it. So I don't even really understand your trauma. I've never been a part of your trauma, whether the trauma was other people, officers, my granddaddy's granddaddy. Like, I have to level set the room. The point of DEI is to understand what policies and practices systemically need to be altered so that all can belong. So if there is an Asian perspective as a leader that you're addressing, my hope would be of that equity leader. And a lot of people have left out of corporate roles to step into DEI spaces because, number one, they understand the need. So I belong to a lot of DEI groups, right? And I think that the Asian population have their own unique historical traumas, even in present. But the barrier sometimes can be just like with a white leader, just like with a Black leader. Honestly, if I'm not asking the right questions, if I am not seeking to ensure how policies and practices are created for all, I'm just simply the wrong leader. It doesn't matter if I'm Black, white, or indifferent, honestly. What is the context of that structure? Because none of this stuff can happen overnight. You can't I would love for government, for organizations to simply do like a rental policy. Everything that doesn't stick to the wall when I turn it upside down is gone. That's what
Mm,
deconstruction can look like, right?
mm,
But we know that they're not going to do that. So, right side up, what can we peel away? I'm going to take down this photo of George Washington or whoever out of the building because it serves no value.
mm,
So all people can be in DEI spaces because here's the second point to why I'm saying that is Black people do not always have to be the chosen people to course correct the trauma that was not caused by them in a company, but we're often selected to do the work. So you're asking me, right? If I invite my trauma into a conversation, that means my lived experience may be healed, maybe it's not, but I am willing to discuss it. When you are pulling me up, like there was that thing earlier in this conversation, I was voluntold that I'm now a leader with no training, no tools. You actually don't value my input to begin with, and I'm being paid less, and dot 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 dot. Well, you're just inviting more trauma to my shoulder. Sharon Clinton, third person, sorry, rejects that. All right. As a DEI leader, it is incumbent of me to go in understanding what I'm attempting to accomplish because most HR leaders and DEI advocates don't hold the power. We yield influence. Does
mm,
that make sense?
Yes.
So Asian or otherwise, like we can't make CEOs change. Like I'm an executive consultant in spaces that I actually can't even share on here um, because of NDAs. But the reality is that they're the ones who can say change the practice, and someone from 1947, 1967 created a policy and practice that's still being played out today, and it no longer holds context. When it was written in 1947, when this company was created 120 years ago, 80 years ago, 20 years ago, it's no longer applicable because the world is different. The way in which your business is operating is different. So, DEI work honestly can be done in partnership, in collaboration with others and by anyone, as long as there have been defined shared values, shared commitments that will be put into practice to include the sum total of it all in whatever your all is. So your all in your company is not my all in the company that I currently serve. And so we just have to honor, we have to consciously be intentional in our leadership about the inclusion of others, understanding first what equity stake is present. If you're not willing to provide equity, that probably needs to be
mm-hmm.
level set. Equity is
Yeah.
not on the table. We're just having a conversation right now to see what we can and will include. Um, so yeah, there's an Asian context, and the Black and brown or BIPOC people feel ways about whatever acronyms. But I just like to go deeper. My identity as an African American woman is not the solution to any one DEI issue across the world. It is just that I have a unique lived experience and have a history of a people behind me through learned knowledge that I intend to apply. So it makes me a possible right person in the room, an Asian person, a white person, a Hispanic person, or whatever, color person doesn't change the narrative of that thing because we don't know what their lived experience is. We have to ask first.
I thank you for that question, King, because you have really done a great job of teasing the DEI event that we will have that
You
Sharon and
did that on
Carl will be a
purpose.
part of. Yeah.
It's
Carl,
all,
did you want to throw some thoughts out since he
I
asked for
just
your
say,
input as well?
Sharon put it eloquently. I think the biggest thing that I oftentimes don't get into the diversity and inclusion conversations. And I do that prospectively from a place of you're not talking about equity. And for first and foremost, equity to me outweighs the diversity and inclusion because we would need to have value conversation processes, procedures for those two if we was equal. The greatest manual that needs to be changed to put us all in the corrective form of DEI is the Constitution. There are a lot of things that we're still living on in that is not applicable to how we should live in 2022. But yet our forefathers have written that for that space and time. And we've carried that on as a cartilage. That's what I've said is to where we are now. Yes, have we become the face of it? Yes, through what has happened. But what has happened with George Floyd has been happening for years. So why did me working at a firm that I work at with over 200 and some attorneys with 3 that looks like me have to be the spokesperson to why they're marching? See, those kind of things, they bring it to the preface of that, and then we tie that and marry that to diversity has to be equipped or equated with the color. No, diversity and inclusion is just that. We're just diverse, and we need to understand how we be included. And we be included when we base the value equitably across the board. How can I sit on your firm at your corporation and I make 5 figures, bringing about the same work as John that's on your corporation? Doesn't look like me, and he's making 6. I outwork John constantly, repetitively, and you know it. But you have not offered me the same equitable value in what I bring to the table as you've given John. And it's not for the work, and it's not for what I bring. It's for how I look. So those are some of the things that we get put upon as the forefront of, because it has been us carrying it through lived experience. And everyone wants to know how we've carried it. But we've carried it like we've always carried it in those before us, as burdens. So now the burden has to be released. And how to release that, make it equitable where we can have these conversations where when I come in the room, as Sharon said, and level set, all the titles got to go. All the egos got to go. So now let me deal with you as human king. Let me deal with you as human Sharon. And now let's get to the point of saying, okay, what's the value you bring? My eyes are closed. I don't see your color. I don't see what you are. What is the value you bring? You take that value and equate it to that value, and then we add value upon what you're bringing to the table. This is going to be an amazing conversation.
Oh man, I can't wait.
It's hard. It's really
It is hard. It is
like
hard.
I would feel sorry for an Asian person if her bosses didn't allow there to be Black context, King.
Yeah.
Like if she can't bring a partner alongside of her to address what could potentially be a Black experience in that company, like what Carl is saying. DEI work is not for the faint of heart. It's a tough situation to be in. And so I applaud those DEI leaders who are focused on it, because everyone like we are today are just simply trying to move the needle of change. It's a tough deal.
It is. And Karen, I'll share this with you right quickly, and I'll share this with you guys as well. I did, I talked about the format that I did in Charlotte, North Carolina. And I'm thinking of Charlotte being the South to some extent, right? Some of those biases are already there before I even got off the plane. I understood that. But I got into the realm of talking to these individual leaders, and these are corporate people that own, that are able to move and shake. And I had one gentleman tell me, regardless of what you say to me in this meeting that we're about to happen, this was us fixing our coffee. I hadn't even begun it. He said, I'm a racist. So what you going to tell me in this meeting going to change how I think about you?
Wow.
This was as we were fixing our coffee.
Oh my gosh.
I haven't even started the webinar. I haven't even started the training. I haven't passed out no paperwork. I hadn't done anything.
When people tell me who they are.
I grinned and added my little French vanilla in my coffee, and we went to town once we went in there. The objectivity of what it is that it's there. And Sharon, I applaud allyship. I want you to be in the room with me. I want to be able to help you understand, not the spokesman, but the allyship, us working together. So if she's right, I'll right. I agree with Sharon. If she doesn't have an ally with her, or they don't allow that, then they're hurting the framework of DEI as a company.
Oh, you're on mute, Sharon.
She's excited. She hit the mute.
I know.
I was like, and no one's going to connect. Sorry for being on mute. So I was like, bringing it back to King's topic.
Yes. Networking is connected.
Right. Like that's a networking of a DEI idea, and there's no connection. There has to be connection. You have to connect it to all things, all people. So I don't want to take up any more time, but the connection is so important. And I love all of the value that you guys brought to that.
Everybody brought so much value today. I just can't wait to write up the summary as usual. and draw people into this conversation so that they can watch it after the fact if they weren't here. Thank you to everybody who was commenting. Thank you to everybody who was watching. Thank you to everybody who will watch. Thank you especially to my 3 wonderful panelists today who I see future co-creation with. I mean, we definitely have the DEI event on the docket. And I'm really just I can't wait for that conversation. It is hard work. And we're going to dig into, what exactly that means and come out with some practical steps as usual that you can apply. There were so many great tips here. I'm going to give everybody just a little moment to kind of say their last moment, as well as where people can find you. King, I'm going to throw it to you because you had your finger up. So I think.
Well, I just want to say my last moment is I want to thank Sharon for that, because my question was truly out of ignorance, and you just educated me. So thank you for that, because now I see it in different perspectives. So I appreciate your answer. Thank you. And now, as far as my contact information, you can find me on LinkedIn, look for Christopher King, as well as my website, kingconnections.org. And then I do my podcast, King Connections Podcast. This has been a wonderful session. I've enjoyed it. Carl, it's been great to meet you. Sharon, it's been great to meet you. And again, Karen, it's great to be building with you again. Thank you all for having me.
Same here, King. Carl, do you want to say a few last words and where to find you?
My last words is be vulnerable. That's definitely my mantra. That's what I live by. And it is not nothing I throw out there lightly. It is years of cultivating the exterior and healing the interior so I can be empowered by what is taking place in my life and move that forward. That's just frankly the nucleus of it in a nutshell. You can reach me, Shawn Watkins, on LinkedIn. This is where I live. This is where I curate. This is where I make a difference. My website is carlshawnwatkins.com. For those who like to follow me, it's bevulnerable.club. I put that catchiness redirect in there so you can find me as well. And we talk about all these topics. I cover everything on my website, from 101s to groups to corps to understanding, leadership. I cover it all. So I love to be in the spaces that we're in, and I look forward to I continue conversations. And King, I'm definitely looking to be on your podcast. I don't know when we're going to make it happen, but I got to get on your
Soon. Both of you all. I got to have you soon.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely.
And Sharon, did you say something about Philadelphia?
Yeah, so I'm in Philly right now. I'm born Memphis, grew up California, lived in Dallas, now in Philly, doing a little bit of hybrid back and forth. But I'm in Philly currently. But I go where the work is, right?
I'm in South Jersey, so I'm right around the corner.
Yeah, let's have lunch. I'll try to wrap this up. Very easy to get a hold of me. Sharon R. Clinton on LinkedIn. I am Sharon Speaks on all other social media platforms. My last words is just be courageous, right? One day at a time, every day at a time, you get to begin again, and that's what begets growth and grace, right? Honor yourself and honor others, and we will see you next time.
It's been amazing. Thank you guys so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen.
Take care. Reach out, Carl.
I definitely will.
I'll follow up. Karen, always a pleasure, my friend. Good to see you. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.